Over 150 years ago, a bunch of Chinese railroad workers negotiated to have a Chinese store established in the vicinity of their place of labor as part of the contract to move to Texas to work on the Houston, Texas Central Railroad. This is the second installment of Cooking Like a Pioneer, where we explore what dishes they could have made with the goods stocked in that store. Hi, my name is Christy, and this is the American Chinese Food Show. There is more behind this Chinese railroad worker story. This was 1870. The South had 4 years ago lost the Civil War. White capitalists contracted with the Chinese Americans in part to diminish the economic power of African American laborers. They wanted to experiment with replacing slave labor with Chinese labor. There were a lot of uncertainties. Would the Chinese be treated as slaves, or would the South be an oasis from the anti-Chinese riots of the West? Tension was strong. We won't get into the details on this channel, but less than a month after the arrival of this first group of Chinese workers in Texas, there was one day when racial tension was briefly put aside, and that was the Chinese New Year. The first one ever celebrated in the state of Texas, in Bremont on January 30th, 1870. According to the Galveston Tri-Weekly News, in full Chinese costume including large umbrellas, they promenaded the streets, to the delight of the juveniles without distinction of race or color. The Chinese Americans drank whiskey and returned to their work camps by noon. Texas was not the only place where Chinese railroad workers celebrated Chinese New Year. There are records of New Year parades all over the West, like in Boise, Idaho, and Salt Lake City, Utah. For example, according to the Utah State Historical Society, to start the new year with a clean slate, Chinese workers in the railroad camps of northern Utah would pay all their debts, and the camp cook would prepare hot water for baths. A midnight feast of abalone and other special foods was followed by a day of fasting from all meat. We can get a glimpse of what the Texas Chinese workers might have eaten to celebrate, since there's a section in the stock list specifically for Chinese New Year. We have preserved dates, limes, melon, which I think could be sugared winter melon, kumquat, olives, mango, bolo, which is pineapple, bolo, and betel nuts. The olive here is a fruit called Chinese olive or white olive, popular in China, Vietnam, and Thailand. It can be preserved savory, sweet, or spicy, usually with licorice. Fun fact, the white olive vendor starting in the 1940s would walk around the neighborhoods in a chicken costume in Guangdong, or throw olives up the building like an airplane after the buyer drops money down from the window in Hong Kong. So they're called rooster olives or airplane olives depending on where you grew up. This list has a lot of snacks and reminds me a bit of the Port Arthur's menu in the early 1900s. Check out our previous episode on tea and snack pairing to learn more. But you can't do a Cantonese Chinese New Year without abalone. Abalone is one of the ingredients on the stock list in a Texas store. I still make abalone on the eve of Lunar New Year every year just so it feels festive. So today I'm making a classic New Year dish of braised abalone with shiitake, 鲍鱼焖冬菇. To cook dry abalone, the saying is you have to soak for 4 days and cook for 2 days. So I'm going to cheat with a can of ready-made abalone, and it will take me a few minutes to make the dish. If you're using pre-cooked canned abalone instead, boil the whole can, don't open it, in a pot for 15 minutes before the following steps. Soak a few shiitake mushrooms. Once rehydrated, marinate with a bit of oil and sugar. Keep the water and cut the mushrooms into small pieces. Heat a pan with oil, ginger, and green onion. And add shiitake and stir fry until you can smell the aroma. Add a bit of cooking wine. Pour in the can of abalone. Turn down the heat. Add a cornstarch slurry using the mushroom water with half a tablespoon of oyster sauce. Cook until the sauce thickens. Season with a bit of salt. You can blanch some vegetables like bok choy or broccoli to put on the side. It's also a tradition to have chicken on the eve of the new year, along with joss sticks to make offerings and pay respect to the ancestors. Cantonese usually steam a whole chicken, but here I'm using 3 items on the stock list instead to make a more common home-cooked dish: ginger root, red dates, and fungus, to make a steamed chicken dish with dates. 紅棗冬菇蒸雞. First, marinate the chicken thighs or drumsticks, skin and bone on, with salt, sugar, soy sauce, sesame oil, oyster sauce, cooking wine, and cornstarch for about 20 minutes. Mix in with red dates, ginger, rehydrated shiitake, and wood ear mushrooms. Steam for about 15 minutes on medium heat. Sprinkle with some green onion and you're done. This was a taste of home to celebrate the new year despite being thousands of miles away from their family for these Chinese railroad workers. So what happened to the 250 workers? It didn't work out. The railroad company at first claimed that the Chinese labor was the only labor they could rely on, but the glowing opinion reversed in half a year. It was reported that the Chinese at work on the Central Railroad are said to be very lazy and trifling, requiring constant watching. It seemed unlikely the Chinese workers suddenly stopped working hard, so something else probably happened. The Houston, Texas Central Rail Company then stopped paying their wages. By September 1870, the Chinese have all quit work and have entered suit against their employers for wages and for failure of compliance with contract. Despite not working out at the end, these 250 Chinese American workers were pioneer immigrants, representing the first large group of Chinese American workers to migrate eastward. According to the US Census, only 217 Chinese lived in the entire South in 1870, including Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. The rail workers heralded the migration of an additional 2,000 Chinese to the American South over the next few years. They left plantations and rails to work for higher wages and better conditions. Some workers saved their money and opened laundry houses. At the height of Chinese laundering, the 1893 Galveston Directory listed 32 Chinese American laundries and 3 non-Chinese laundries. Some opened restaurants, and others worked as house servants. They established many of the first Chinese American communities throughout the East, South, and Midwest that we see remnants of even today. I hope you enjoyed this episode imagining what a festive day would be like for these pioneers amidst the tough situation they were in. If you like our content, subscribe to our channel. See you soon!